Okay, this is my video for my public speaking 1101 class. My name is Kaylee Howard. This is my audience. And I guess let's do this. Okay, so my topic is the rights of Indigenous people. So my specific purpose today is to inform my audience about the rights of Indigenous people in the United States. The thesis statement is that our country must advance its efforts to protect and preserve the human rights and unique Indigenous rights of the Indigenous people who reside in the United States. Without Indigenous people, the United States would be nothing. I am 1/16 Cherokee Indian, and while that might not seem like much, my grandmother has kept the traditions and teachings very prevalent in my life. At a young age, she began teaching me various components of the Cherokee lifestyle so that we do not let this heritage die. I have grown up visiting various Cherokee communities to learn more about my distant ancestors, while at home, we incorporated elements of the Cherokee lifestyle into our modern lives. Today I will use my knowledge passed down from my grandmother and knowledge that I've gained from research, because surprisingly grandmothers aren't always right, to educate you on the rights of Indigenous people who live in the U.S. So, I'd like to start out with my first point. Indigenous people were not given the rights that they have today until 2007. 2007 was the first time in history that Indigenous rights were recognized on the world stage, which marked a turning point towards justice for Indigenous people. Today, the Declaration is the most comprehensive international instrument on the rights of Indigenous people, as stated by the United Nations. The Declaration addressed the minimum standards for well-being of the Indigenous peoples, and it also discusses the existing human rights standards and fundamental freedoms as they apply to Indigenous people. Although the U.S. was one of 4 countries who opposed the Declaration, they are working towards implementing the components of this Declaration. This Declaration changed how Indigenous people are treated by the government. While this change is beneficial for the Indigenous people it affects, there was a lot put into this transition going smoothly, and it is still being worked on today. Some of the components that were addressed according to cultural survival include environmental protection, healthcare, economic development, and cultural protection. The most important point to be made is that this declaration requires actual consent by tribes, which is much better than the simple consultation mandated by prior laws. Many strides have been taken by the U.S. to implement these laws. Some ways the U.S. has helped these communities include cultural resources such as historic preservation and archaeology, and also housing resources. Despite these efforts, challenges continue to impact Native Americans today. The U.S. recognition of the UN Declaration seems like a step forward, and it remains to be seen how this will actually affect U.S. policymaking. In conclusion, the Indigenous people of the United States have had a long history in our country and deserve the rights that they have been given. Without them, the United States would not be the country it is today. And here is a quote from the Declaration by the United Nations. Indigenous peoples have the right to full enjoyment as a collective or as individuals of all human rights and fundamental freedoms as recognized in the Charter of the United Nations, the Declaration of Human Rights, and international human rights law. Thank you.